So welcome everyone once again. We're really excited to be hosting this session, which will hopefully give you some insights into what graduate employers are doing to build out their digital brand year round and help or educate students about the types of opportunities that they offer. So for those who don't know me, so I'm Grant, so I'm I'm the partnerships director here at Prosper. And I can see in the chat room, I've actually got a few employers tuning in from Australia, New Zealand. I can see even a few clients across the Philippines, Singapore, and that as well. But for those who are not familiar with Prosper, we're the company that brings you Grad Australia and Grad New Zealand, which are actually the highest ranked graduate job sites in both Oz and New Zealand. Plus, we also power about 75 or so other partner directories across the region. So for today, I'd like to introduce you to our panel. So we've got Sam McDonald, I'm going to pass across to in a moment. He's one of the account managers at Prosper. We've got Stephanie Kish, who's the grad recruiter at Pitcher Partners, and Jan D'Silva from Capgemini. So just a bit of housekeeping before we kick things off, and I pass across to Sam. So this session will be recorded, and so it'll be available afterwards. We'll share on email. We'll also be sharing any slides as well and materials that Sam's about to walk through. And last but not least, we'd love to hear from you. So for those who are not familiar with Zoom, there's a little chat box down the bottom. Just hit chat and fire on through some questions. I'll play mediator in the meantime as we go through. But yeah, we want to have this as an organic and open session for everyone to engage with. Yep, so without further ado, I'll pass across to Sam.
Thanks, Grant. And welcome, everyone. Good to see a lot of familiar faces on call, actually, including a couple of my own clients, which I'm surprised you've want to hear more from me. I thought you would be sick of me by now, but that's all right. Yeah, for today, we're going to talk about this new concept we've been talking about with a couple of people called Evergreen advertising. We'll go into a bit of detail in a tick as well, but again, to provide a bit more context again on Prosper, as Grant has mentioned, we're a company with a mission to help every student find the perfect job, every employer find their ideal candidate. And what that means is we've got to be very much on the front line of helping to predict the future of what students are looking for. We like to take a long-term view of what students are going to be engaging with, how students can want to learn and connect with the employers of the future, because a lot of what we see in student recruitment is long-term in its effect as well. Yeah, as Grant mentioned, we run jobs platforms across APAC. I think it's actually up to 90 now, Grant, not 75, just to quickly correct you in terms of platforms that we've got across APAC, including Grad Australia, Grad New Zealand, but a number of university-related boards as well, student society boards, association boards. But what that means really is we've got a lot of access to how students are engaging, how students are researching, what they are looking for. And we try to do a lot of user testing all the time to make sure that we all can predict and react to what's happening and what students are looking for. As Grant mentioned, it's myself, Steph and Jan on call today. So Steph, the graduate recruiter from Pitcher Partners, twice nominated now for the AAGE Top Graduate Recruiter, which I'm sure she loves me mentioning. And we've also got Jan from Capgemini up in Sydney, lucky for her, not stuck down here in Melbourne like us, and who's this year been nominated for the Will Spencer Memorial Award for Innovation in the Graduate Market. So hopefully some good insight here from some pretty, some pretty leading thought leaders in the industry. And then of course myself, graduate attraction consultant, been with Prosper for about 2 years now, but I actually came straight from university prior to this role. So sometimes I like to bring in my my knowledge from both graduate industry, but also how students are engaging, because I've got family and cousins and all that as well. Still
where
at
we also
university.
mentioned that you've been nominated for an AAG award too, Sam.
I knew that you were going to say that if I brought that up, but that's all right. For today, what I want to talk about particularly is a bit of a deep dive into how students are currently searching, looking into how and when they're particularly searching, rethinking what we do in the typical approach. And I'll sort of break that down in terms of what we see is typically how students are engaging with your content, the timings and the like as well, and then compare that to what we're actually seeing in terms of how students are searching and where they're searching. Of course, we're going to hear from Steph and Jan and what they've been doing differently this year to innovate and get that brand highly visible. So we'll hear from that as well. And then lastly, we'll end with creating this Evergreen campaign. What you can take from this discussion and hopefully implement almost immediately to really start to build towards next year's campaign and into the future as well. So I'm going to start with a bit of background on student enrollment. Apologies for our non-Australians on call. I'm probably going to deep dive into Australian figures to start with, but it is worth noting that the trends we'll talk about is pretty consistent across the board. Because in Australia, it's about 1.5 million students. I think New Zealand's about 20% of that or so. Seems like a lot till you realize it's about, in India, I think 9.4 million students we're studying, about 800,000 who graduate each year. But even in the larger countries as well, it's always worth breaking down not just the numbers of students who are enrolled, but what they're enrolled in. Because I think all of us on call, we've all got particular student cohorts that we're really trying to engage, whether it be, for example, IT students, whether it be engineering students, whether it be Indigenous students, South Pacific students. And it's worth putting into context how many of these students are actually out there studying and when they're actually engaging. So breaking it down, for example, 1.5 million Australian university students, about 150,000 or so graduating each year. Roughly 4,000 of those students who are graduating are IT students. If you're talking about the top 10% of female IT students, right about 60. And there's plenty of employers on the call who probably want to hire all 60 of those female IT students themselves. There is downfall with that, though. While we all have our set periods of time that we recruit, maybe it's March for a lot of our Australian employers, maybe later in the year, September for some of our UK employers and the like as well. What we tend to find is students aren't always aware or on our same schedules. Like if we have 60 female IT students, for example, what happens if 5 of them come on in May, right after your applications close? Potentially miss out on really engaging with that student and missing out on our ideal talent. In fact, when we look at how engagement typically tends to work in the graduate space, we find it's really predominantly focused around 2 particular areas of time. When you're recruiting for your graduates, and if you do an intern program, a vacation program, co-op program around then as well. You'll see in those periods where you're not recruiting, engagement, by here we've measured it by page views on your profile, but it could be on your website, it could be anywhere. It really drops off in those months where we're not recruiting. However, when we look at when students are actually searching, it's very consistent. So the 1.5 million students utilizing the Australian products, for example, there's at least 150,000 students or so in any given month. You look at those May, April periods where typically a lot of you might not actually be engaging with candidates, probably not recruiting. You're actually missing out on engaging a really key chunk of that cohort. And going back to those target students, potentially if we're looking at one of those female IT students or an Indigenous engineer, for example. There's a very likely chance they're online in that period, and we're not actually in the current format engaging them. Because for a lot of you, it's not necessarily, and it's always worth noting, it's not necessarily about encouraging more applications, of course, not always what we're looking for. It's about engaging that high quality candidate who might not be on that schedule. So typically, those periods also aren't tailored towards students who might not be in that job search period as well. They might not be ready to actually apply for jobs. And if students are only really finding when you're looking for roles and things like that, what is it that you can currently doing to engage more students at their younger ages? It's worth noting about 30% of students, roughly, I think it's more so in New Zealand, other countries as well, roughly 30% of students begin their research in their career in their first year of university. If we go back to what we were looking at before, that graph of your typical engagement, what are you doing in those periods to actually engage those students? And if all you're really doing is reactive, look, we've got a job open, come apply for us. What are you doing to make sure that student has something for you to interact with and learn and become part of your long-term engagement network? When we're talking about those younger age groups as well, it's always good and worthwhile to make sure you're aware of what students are looking for in those different periods of time. Whether it be that final year student who's looking for a job predominantly, maybe looking for recruitment tips. What's the knowledge, what context do they need when they're actually researching? Compared to your penultimate year students, look at maybe internships, maybe they're just looking on who's recruiting next year so they can start that plan. Maybe looking for, again, application tips and tricks or general insight to the industry you might want to apply for. And then your earlier years who are still deciding on what industry they might want to go down. They're still deciding on potentially even what degree they might be choosing or what major they might be choosing. How are you engaging those students and making sure you're part of that educational journey for them so that we can attract that talent and build that brand immersion. This is why we've seen this shift quite recently towards this idea of evergreen advertising. Finding a way to be visible and engaging in different ways throughout the year. So that for that student that comes on in May, or that student that comes on in November, they've got something to interact with you with. They've got something to learn about. So by the time they actually are ready to apply, you've been with them on a journey. You've built that brand. You've created that real understanding amongst your student cohort. And irrespective of the time of year, you've got this great cohort of students ready and willing to apply for your roles. So we didn't miss out particularly on those ideal target candidates. So Evergreen, simplest form, just strategy that allows students to connect with you all year round. It should in turn allow you to engage back with your students as well, that cohort who are engaging with you. It should really be about building understanding, as I mentioned previously, building that cohort understanding what they're looking for as well. I think as I've alluded to, it's particularly important, particularly in this period of time right now. There's less access to traditional early engagement strategies, whether it be on campus, going to cocktail nights with COVID and the like. Students' priorities are changing as well. What we're finding is younger students are even more so now looking to research, looking to engage in employers outside of their job application periods. In fact, what we've seen across the sites is something like 100% increase in page views, and particularly a lot of that's driven from younger cohorts of students as well. We're looking to research, interact. There's also this decreased opportunity for traditional work experience, whether it be working together learning or some internships, definitely a bit harder to engage with at the moment. There's always that heightened risk that in-person activities might get cancelled again if it's another flare-up as well. So what are we doing to continually make sure we've mitigated that potential risk of maybe not being able to go back into market in the period that we might be expecting? What are we doing to make sure that no matter what's happening in this continually changing world, we're engaging our next cohort of talent? And finally, contrary to what we might think, demand for your target candidates is actually not on the decline. It's actually increasing. We've seen more and more employers still trying to enter the market as they've realized, we need to still make sure we're maintaining our early engagement. We make sure our pipeline is still coming through strong. And I mean, I've mentioned tech a few times, but if we go back to tech students as well, as more employers realize they need to revitalize that part of their business to react to working from home and building more online engagement amongst their retail base or what have you, that's continuing to increase. In fact, we get messages every day at Prosper from new employers coming into the market saying, oh, we're looking for more tech students or engineering students, or we're looking for more finance students, all those same cohort of students you're really looking for. Now, I'm going to break down in a tick what we think is the best way to build this evergreen strategy, this approach to always engaging, but just to making sure you keep in mind, what we really want to do is find high quality students, obviously the ones we want to recruit, really help them to showcase their high intention. It's not just about getting more application numbers, it's about getting that student engaged who is passionate about what we do, passionate about what the industry does, really wants to work for us particularly, and is willing to showcase that. Obviously, again, target candidates. You want to be able to get information as you engage with students, so you can be more aware of the female students who engage with you earlier on, so you can sort of predict as it comes through what the expectation you can get around hiring more of that target candidate. But also hopefully so you can encourage more of those students to actually apply for the program as well. Some other key tips, really you want to make sure they're hands-off as possible in their most basic form. Obviously there'll be parts of what you do that will be a bit more engaging, and I think Steph and Jan will talk about particularly those aspects of what they did this year in that space. But really at its most basic, you want to make sure, regardless of what's happening in your world and business, whether you're recruiting, whether you're in the middle of assessment center process, there's something that's hands-off that's continually building that engagement. We really want to make sure you're providing context as well. Context will be key when I talk about how we build our evergreen strategy in the end, but you want to make sure you keep in mind what students are looking for at different levels of their year, and building context, whether it be on the sort of jobs you recruit for, or sort of work that you do, or what it means, what an ideal candidate is to you, maybe recruitment tips and the like as well. One of the examples of how we've seen Evergreen done in the past is through an expression of interest. A lot of you probably have done one to a degree for any period of time. Quite a useful tactic. It's probably not something we'll angle towards throughout most of the call, because it doesn't give that key point, which I mentioned before, which is context. Idea of providing context. In saying that though, they've been very, very successful in the past. I think Westpac, for example, on the call has had some awesome success with that. Another way we've seen is through the idea of virtual experiences. We'll talk about that as well, and what we've seen as we've developed this initiative here. But again, the idea is answering key questions, building brand affinity, and being on all throughout the day. For those of you who haven't seen a virtual experience before, what it does is it's a effectively case study that students can jump into throughout the year to get better understanding of what it is you actually do in a platform virtually. Engage with that throughout the year. I'll pause there from my presentation. I might actually throw to Steph now to talk a little bit about what she's done this year to increase engagement. Talk about virtual experience she's helped to build up, but also more broadly about what, Steph, you've done to really heighten the Pitcher Partners brand. So I might throw to you. Can you give us a bit of background, Steph, on who Pitcher Partners is for those who aren't aware? Experience in the role, what you've done, how many people in your team are helping you to build your brand and build the engagement, and what you've done this year.
Welcome. Hello, everyone. So my name is Steph. Like Sam mentioned, I look after the graduate recruitment at Pitchers, but I focus purely on Melbourne. So who we are as a firm, we are a professional services firm that operates in the middle market. How we are structured are a little bit differently to other professional services firms in the sense of we have a national presence. However, we operate independently. So Melbourne has a completely different program to Sydney, to Brisbane, and so forth. So when it comes to my marketing and my strategy and how we engage with students, it is mainly focused at that Melbourne level rather than nationally as well. So we do a number of different things in order to keep students engaged with us. I remembered Sam's question. The team that we have is myself and then Nat, who looks after the talent acquisition from a manager level. So really it's kind of me day in, day out, being involved with the students in all ways, speaking to them at assessment centres, phone interviews, everything. I am their one point of contact. So when it comes to resources, we are very, very lean here at Pitchers, but we also have an amazing marketing and client experience team who creates all the visual imagery for the firm as well. So some of the things that we have done at Pitchers, and you'll see here on the right-hand side, is the development of virtual experiences. And that ties in very, very well with the Evergreen strategy of always being on. So we decided we would focus our virtual experiences on areas that people necessarily don't know a lot about. So when you go into a professional services landscape, everyone knows that you go in and you can be in audit or you can be in tax and so forth. But what a lot of people don't understand is some of those more niche areas of a professional services landscape. So as you'll see here, this is actually for our risk services team. So risk service is internal audit. So we decided to work with the team to develop something that will help provide a little bit more insight into what actually risk is and internal audit. Yet again, it's not overly spoken about in an academic qualification sense. So when you go and you do your accounting degree or whatever degree, internal audit isn't really something that is touched on. So when it comes to understanding what that is, students don't know about it, which then in turn makes it hard for them to want to apply for something that they know nothing about. So we decided we would develop a case study, the virtual experience for students to be able to get a deeper understanding of what it would be like to work within that team. And it's been really great to be able to see the knowledge that is coming out of it. Yes, it's still very new, but I think risk services is now something that people are starting to talk about more, which is really great because it is such a vital part of any organisation. And I think with everything that's gone on, it will continue to be really important as organisations think about it, the risks that are associated with their operations. So that's one way that we have engaged, and we worked with the team on Prospel to develop three virtual experiences that now just sit there and students can go and do them whenever they want, which is great, which is always helping us build our brand. But we are extremely personal at Pitcher Partners. Our kind of phrase that we use is making careers personal. So a lot of what I do is actually getting to know students on a deeper level and getting them to understand who Pitcher Partners are as a firm, which can be extremely resource heavy. But I think it's all about being strategic in where you choose to invest your time. And we're very fortunate here in Melbourne that universities and universities careers teams are also really stepping up to the plate to create that collaboration with employers as well. So some of the things that I have done all focus around providing students with information and them getting something out of the sessions that we do, whether it's learning a new skill, whether it's learning about the recruitment process, whether it's learning about the firm. They need to what they want is information, and being able to give them that is really, really important and helps you build your brand, but also helps them develop. So when they are applying for grad roles and entering the industry, they have a little bit more knowledge. So to provide some insight in some of the sessions we ran this year, with everything that has gone on, mental health and wellbeing is a really big topic at the moment, and we're very fortunate that we do have a mindfulness and meditation accredited expert in the organisation. So we partnered with each of the main universities in Melbourne, and we ran a session around wellness. In addition to that, we partnered with both Melbourne and Monash University and ran a session around Power BI, which is all around the data visualization tool. I did another session around navigating the corporate environment, which was teaching students around how you make that adjustment into a corporate environment and getting a baseline understanding around what is acceptable and what isn't, and how they are protected under national employment standards and all of that. And I think that has been extremely successful because the uptake in students and the conversations that you have are just so more in depth and engaging, rather than just going to a career fair where you answer the same 10 questions over and over and over again throughout the full day. And I think you definitely will see a transition away from those careers fairs, whether they are in person or virtually, because the information that students are getting is just not there. It's not a waste, but to spend a full day at a career fair isn't practical anymore from a resource perspective. You would rather go and spend an hour across the course of 8 weeks promoting your brand and targeting an audience that are interested, that are proactive, that are registering for the session and expressing their interest in that session, rather than just going to a career fair because it just happened to be there. I definitely also have started to continue to look at early ID programs. You have seen that rapidly being uptaked across the professional services landscape. You now have events across first year students, second year students, and then moving into your penultimate and final year students. And definitely trying to capture students and build your brand at that younger level is really, really important. Another great way in how we have engaged and continued to build our brand throughout university is through co-op programs and scholarship programs as well. Particularly if you are lean on resources, it provides such a great pipeline and brand exposure because you're targeting a certain set of students and you're being involved with them throughout their entire degree. So you can meet and engage with them from their first year and still have that touch point throughout their entire degree. And then when it comes to the end, when they have applied, they already know so much about your brand and go, hang on, I want to apply for that organization as well. There's just so many different ways in how you can be involved with students. I definitely think being involved in events is still very important because the hunger of students to want to understand an organisation is really, really pivotal for a lot of people. And working with your main universities around these sessions of navigating the graduate recruitment process and so forth, the attendance rates are through the roof. And I think that's really showing that students have that demand and they want to learn about employers and they want to learn about how to stand out. And the amount of cover letters that I have read that said, I've met you at this event, or I've seen you here and so forth. I think that really showcases the value of attending those sessions rather than going to events that are cast very, very far and wide, going to strategic sessions where there may be limited amount of people, but those people really want to be engaged with your brand. Aside from that, thinking more of the always on brand, I have done quite a bit of kind of videos and stuff like that, which are hosted on our Grad Australia website, but then also on YouTube as well, because that's a way for students to always see you and learn about your organisation in more depth. But also it's a great opportunity for you to provide more insight around the opportunities that you offer at your firm as well. Social media is really important because of how we are structured as an organisation. We don't do a lot on social media because our programs differ from that national perspective. We do definitely do promotion of our programs of when you can apply on Instagram and so forth, but in relation to takeovers and stuff like that, that's not necessarily what we do. We take a lot more of a personal approach and really getting to know the people that are applying for our roles here at Pitches. And I definitely would also say that don't underestimate student societies. Student societies are really, really great. And particularly those where you don't necessarily see the applications coming through. So we have decided to sponsor societies that we have never done partnerships with in the past. So casting your net outside of your typical levels or your universities where you see those applications, such as we have a very high rate of students from Melbourne and Monash applying. So actually building a relationship with them may not be as successful as building something that we haven't worked with in the past, like La Trobe or a Deakin. And I think it also comes back to understanding what type of candidates you want to attract and where you can find them, because there is so many students, like Sam said, that are applying for jobs and at university at the moment. It's not necessarily casting your net as wide as you can. It's trying to find the students that align to your organisation and value your values and want to work and do the type of work that you offer to your clients or your industry. Don't really know if that answered anything, Sam.
No, that was great, Steph. On the events, out of interest, you mentioned you go to a lot of different events as a one-person team, and you sort of recommending more about the educational side of things, of how you're doing your events. Do you reckon how much of what you're attending and what you're talking about to students about is actually your program compared to tips for recruitment more broadly, tips about different industry, and actually giving context back to the student?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I definitely do. I think it's split as well, depending on the educational session you're providing. So like I mentioned, we did the Power BI sessions. That's not something that I ran because I'm not a data and analytics genius. So by getting representatives from the business to actually shine a light on that particular educational piece is also a great way when it is resource lean. We did another round of another session around investment advisory and what actually that is. So if you can utilize people in your business to provide that educational session, that definitely does help. But I would say that it's probably sitting at about maybe 70% of the sessions that I do is around the recruitment process and around kind of understanding that. But in saying that, like, we have ran more sessions than we ever have providing that educational piece. It really comes down to working with the universities and working with student societies and having that appetite and understanding what sessions that they actually want. So a lot of it was working with them to say, these are the services we offer. What do you want to learn more about? And then they go, hang on, let's do a session around Power BI, or let's do the wellness session. So I think it's also understanding where the demand is for them to learn more about.
Yeah. Do you know how many sessions you actually have attended out of interest? If you could put an estimate on it?
Yeah, so I think definitely from a recruitment hat, I probably have done about 40 this year. And then from more of an educational perspective, maybe about 20.
Yep.
So quite a lot.
60 events this year as a team of one.
Yeah.
And all Victorian as well.
All Victorian as well, all virtual, which does make it a little bit easier because you're not driving or commuting, you're kind of dialing in and that's it. But I think the thing is, like, I love this and I think I do more than what is required because I love talking to students and helping students. That's why I work in this role, and that's why many people that do work in early careers work in early careers. And I think you just want to be able to help students land their first opportunity, whether it is at your company or not. You just want to be able to help them on that journey. And I think particularly now with everything that's gone on, there's a lot of worried students out there, and the anxiety and kind of stress levels are a lot higher than they should be at the moment.
Yep. Fantastic. Thanks for that, Steph. We'll come back to questions from the team, from everyone else on the call in a bit as well. But I might throw to Jan, if you're happy to give a bit of context on what Capgemini's done this year. But before you do, to sort of throw you under the bus a little bit as well, so Capgemini has actually been recruiting for most of this year as well, a consistent recruiting process. So unlike most, where once and done in March or something like that, you've been forced to be visible for this entire period as well, and really innovate how that approach has gone. So keen to hear a bit more about what you've done this year, Jan, as a team of one as well, I think. Team of one or two?
Well, one, but got loads of people supporting in the background as well with the wider team. Just I'll take a moment, Sam, to just acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I joined from. So I'm over in Ryde in New South Wales. So I acknowledge the Wallumedegal peoples and pay respect to the elders past, present and emerging. Absolutely. We were pretty much, we've been actively campaigning since about March this year. I know, I can see Amanda Bullock on the call. She is one of our team and actually made it to Adelaide for the big meet just before lockdown happened. So I see this is where, she's got a traditional role as an EA, but everyone just rolls up their sleeves and helps. And so that was our last real physical event. And we made the decision once the pandemic happened and the borders started closing and mayhem hit, to not have an intake in July, and that's why we've been campaigning all year with the view now to recruit and hire for next year. So essentially, also, just a clause here, I've never done recruitment before, so I've been making it up all along, and luckily for me I got to make it up completely because COVID hit and no one had experienced it before, so here was a good chance to just reimagine things. And being also part suburban housewife, my price was bargain hunting. So I'm like at an Aldi on a Wednesday looking for the cheapest deal. That was me, and that was my mantra, and getting out to actually find events to be part of. So I was looking for things that were either free or very, very reasonable in terms of interaction with the student community. And essentially how we pivoted is I knew from talking, so essentially my role is the graduate program manager. So I've always been post-hire, but speaking to our alumni from the program, a lot of what I hear is that they didn't really know the Capgemini brand right up until, 2 days before deadline. They saw it somewhere, they applied, and they love it here. So I really knew that we needed to do more in getting our brand out there. So our company is really big in Europe, not so well known over here. And in order to get that recognition out there, we've done several things. A lot of what Steph's talking about in terms of attending virtual career fairs. So I can relate. I think I've been in about 33 different online events. This is either through virtual career fairs or one-on-one, like I call them clubs, but I think Steph used a fancier word, like co-op programs potentially is the right term. Essentially looking at what does our organization actually need. So we're also, much like other tech companies, looking for a culture add, right? We're not looking for culture fit anymore. We're looking for diversity in background. We've got different things that we need to do better on. And so we had that opportunity to rethink, what do we need to do? Do we need to get more girls in the room? Do we need to get, you know, more different ethnicity in the room? You know, we just wanted a whole mixed bag of different types of people, different types of thought leadership. And so what I did, because I'm essentially looking after the grad recruitment and the program over in Australia, so it's a nationwide program, unlike Steph who's looking at Melbourne, I lent heavily on our graduates who are in the program. So tapped on them to ask for leads on clubs that they've been part of or clubs that they are aware of in their alma mater, and used our contact list to try and penetrate into that to see what support they needed. So a lot of our activity has been around using our intel. So something that's unique to us in terms of our organization is we have a good lens as to what's happening in industry, you know, which sectors are booming, which practices, so artificial intelligence, machine learning, data, all that is the booming side of the world, and which areas are not doing so well. So we were able to talk to the students, because one of the very first events I attended, in chat, someone said, is it even worth applying for jobs? Isn't it pretty much like we're all pretty much screwed? And that was really sad to see, but that's essentially what the mood was. I don't know if Steph would relate. The mood's been very, they're very worried. And, you know, with the recession, with COVID, everything, the students are really fearful. So it was good to provide them some insights on, okay, maybe you don't want to be knocking on Qantas's door right now, but maybe you could pivot and use your data analytics and aviation degree to maybe knock on public sector door. Maybe you could look at the pharmaceuticals. You can look at the telcos, because that side of the world is still going pretty strong. So that's essentially the type of conversations we're having. Secondly, what we did is we lent on Prospel to emerge our virtual internship. So we wanted to focus on teaching the students, or whoever wanted to do it, giving them the skills that will be useful for them no matter where they landed. So the things we focused on were generic business skills like hypothesis-driven analysis, stakeholder analysis, 2B process mapping, because any entry-level role, you end up doing that kind of stuff. And data reconciliation exercise, gave them a big dirty spreadsheet and let them go at it based on what the client wanted to derive, and showed them as a model answer what we were looking for. So that type of guidance. And we also ran several consultant skills workshops in terms of, you know, how to operate in a work environment, what types of things we look for to be work ready. And something that I found really helpful is in this virtual landscape, we actually provided a lot of mock virtual assessment centers. So we had the grad community, essentially whoever was able to or had the passion to support the student community out and had the time, we organized exercises, interviews, all in a mock environment where students could actually get practice interacting in a virtual environment, in solving group exercises as well as interviewing, and gave them feedback then and there on what they could improve on. We've also attended, so Women at Capgemini is something that we run internally. And that's like we have a month-long event, and part of that event we had several of our VPs, vice presidents, partake in a session with women-focused groups at universities to take it to the road and have conversations on, you know, empowerment, breaking through negative self-talk, that kind of stuff as well. So all just with the notion to help and reach out, but definitely to improve our brand. And then everything I do, as Sam would attest, everything we do goes on LinkedIn, because if it's not on LinkedIn, it didn't happen, right? So in order to make it live as long as possible, we meaning I, do a screenshot like I will do this session, so everyone smile, because I'm going to do that print screen thing, post it on LinkedIn, hashtag it, and it just lives for a few more days. And then another thing that I have been doing, which I think is fairly successful, that, you know, take it if it suits, is when you see star candidates come your way, connect with them on LinkedIn and let them see what the company is about. And when I speak to them now in shortlisting and I connect, I say, come have a look at the post, get a feel for the company culture, because essentially we're recruiting long-term. We want you to be the leader of our within our organization. So get a feel for the type of things we do in the graduate program and the company, so you can see for yourself whether this is the type of place you want to work at. So I think that kind of summarizes it. We also did that expression of interest thing on our website, so that's worth knowing. So essentially, when our campaign is not active, people just, you know, leave their details, and when campaign starts, we just do a broadcast to them saying, hey, our applications are open if you're still interested.
Thanks, Jan. Super context there as well. Doing lots of things, particularly for a first-time recruiter. Pretty awesome stuff in terms of the outreach as well. And we've seen it for, I mean, both Pitch Partners and Capgemini have seen huge increases in traffic and visibility on their profiles. I think Capgemini has had one of the largest engagements this year, for example, in terms of employers as well. So it's all that supplementary stuff as well. And I think, as you mentioned, Jan, it's being targeted in where you're spending your energies. And Steph, you said the same thing, being targeted in where you're spending your energies, where you're doing events, but making sure what you're giving back is education and context for students as well. It's not just about apply for us, it's great to work here. It's about context, educating that future cohort as well. In fact, that leads into, come back to questions in a tick as well for you, Jan. You're not out of the hook just yet. But in terms of some key steps for everyone here for creating an Evergreen campaign, I thought I'd just quickly start with a couple of key tips. Begin with the end in mind. And by that, I mean, who is your target audience? Know that, you know, who are my target students? What are the key skills that they might not have that I want them to have? What do I want my candidates to possess? Identify how early you want to engage your students as well. Maybe you are just like, all right, I'm happy just to be visible right now for my next cohort of students. That's fine. You know, understand also, of course, in terms of the next one, or know your audience's key goals. If you are going earlier, if you're going to try and engage a high school student even, or a first year student, second year student, know what they're looking for at that point in time. First year students not looking for context on trying to get through every stage of your recruitment process. They might want some general recruitment tips, but they also particularly want context on the industry, about key trends, about where things are moving as well. So make sure that when you're engaging, you know your content's tailored towards that as well. Always engaging is obviously a key point as well. You want to be consistently either going to lots of events, or at least having something that's standby students can engage with, whether it be an expression of interest, whether it be a virtual experience, whether it be something that no matter what a student does, they can come and interact with that. Lots of those LinkedIn posts are a really good example of that. Like, it's not always a static piece of content. Sometimes it can just be consistent LinkedIn, but it's all about always engaging, no matter what they're doing, to seeing you in that brand as well. You really want to connect each of your strategies as well. Now, what I mean by that is you want to make sure that if a student's seeing you at a physical event or at a virtual event, and they're learning in their first year about you, you want to give them something for them to then do as a next step. Whether it be, as Jan said, like your LinkedIn page, so you can follow them. That's something that connects into the next event that you're running that they'll be aware of now. Whether it be telling them to be part of a talent community that gives them more context or something like that, whether it be telling them to go do a virtual experience, a virtual internship, what have you. You want to be able to connect the steps so you can continue to bring that student through the process of your Evergreen strategy right up until they hit apply. Create your candidates. And by that I mean, if you're going to be educating them, and going back to beginning with the end in mind, know what key skills you want. Know what areas you really want to improve, maybe more female candidate, female tech students, etc. Help build that cohort. Be as much a part of it as the universities or the high schools. Be a big part of that process. And then scale first, key and foremost. Make sure you scale first, then refine, then go to your target stuff. That probably takes me into what you should be doing from the end of this call. And again, we'll send through all this information. I'll give you a bit of a document after this, later this week about how this works. But really what you should be doing from now, everyone on this call, if I was going to go recruit for graduates in March next year, get your roll up. And now I don't mean necessarily, you're probably still going to be working out right up until maybe March, the exact number of your different divisions or agencies or streams you're going to have, the exact numbers, maybe even your exact date or exact degrees, but give them context on roughly when they could expect that you be advertising, what your benefits are as well. What's the value proposition? That should remain pretty consistent. And where, give back and our students do this and that. Get that context going right from now. As you learn more about it, you can give them more context. But really, this should be your first step to starting to engage for next year. Now, this particular strategy is really aimed at penultimate year, final year students for next campaign, but it does provide some context for younger generations as well, as they can start to get familiar with when they can expect to recruit, because you'd be surprised how many students don't realize that March might be the time that you recruit, or most employers recruit for that matter. I mean, most of it, again, will probably be on your profile or on your website or what have you. So just make sure that you're getting that out to your marketing channels as well, not just to your website where they might not see you. Make sure that it's highly visible when you're recruiting. This is actually to give you a bit of context on that as a strategy. I've got 2 employers I've wanted to compare side by side. Now, they're very, very similar employers. In terms of who they recruit, where their location's based, the numbers that they recruit as well. Now, what you'll see is here around November, January period, both of them had very, very similar strategies. Had their profile live, they went into March, and the blue employer went to market, they recruited, had their campaign, and they've dropped down that after that. Now, this second employer, which I've called step 1 employer, they decide to recruit in June, July instead of that normal period. But what they did instead was, right from March, they put their job up. They said, they built more information into it, their streams and all that sort of stuff as they went, but they said, we're going to be recruiting in June, July. This is the benefits of working for us. This is roughly who we're going to be hiring potentially. This is just a placeholder. Register your interest now though. What you'll start seeing though is with that step 1 employer, they really start to build that engagement very early on. There was a runway to when they actually had their applications open, built that student interest, and they're ready to go and had double the engagement. Again, similar employers. Both are actually voted to top 100. I think even this employer, regular employer, outranks them in that ranking as well. So this is a very easy and effective strategy that hopefully everyone can jump into and start doing. The next, and this is where we start getting to probably more the developed part, build those education skills. What do you want your students to learn more about? With the soft skills, this is what you do, what skills are needed. Provide that context so that younger students especially know where their degree can take them. Now, that might be things like a podcast, for example, a consistent podcast that talks about the culture of what you do, key skills. Maybe it's videos like what Steph's talked about, giving recruitment tips. all are aimed at that cohort of students who are ready for that period of time. Maybe it be, I'm sure a lot of you got learning programs that you give to your students within your first couple of weeks of them starting in your graduate cohort. Potentially it's something you get into their hands earlier, whether it be a short course on your website, whether it be developing, again, a virtual experience, as we talked about. Work out, and going back to begin with the end in mind, what it is you want your students to know, your candidates to know, and build tools that actually educate them. It's going to be different ways for different approaches as well. Again, make sure it is evergreen as well. We had another, to add to that last slide about that employer, we saw an employer take this method right from the end of last year with a very similar employer. They had it from roughly November. They had a way for students to interact, the talent community idea of engaging with students and providing them context as it went. They had a huge runway into their March recruitment period, dwarfing that of the other employers. But as you'll note, as we drop down again, their engagement times, you look at even that step one employer goes right back down again. They've consistently maintained that engagement across their profile. In fact, it's starting to jump back up again as they've been adding more and more more and more educational tools to that evergreen strategy, because it shouldn't be static. Build as you go. It doesn't all have to be perfect right from the get-go. Build more, add more for the students to engage with as they move through that pipeline as well. Interact, and this is where we start talking about what Jan and Steph have been doing. Go to those, don't make it just all one way. Go to these events, educate, give context throughout them, be targeted with how you're approaching, but feed them back into those previous tools as well. Whether it be, hey, after you've done this, jump on our LinkedIn, find out more about us, consistently keep up to date there. Or hey, maybe you should register for our podcast that keeps coming out. Or maybe you should check out our film series. Maybe you should try a virtual experience. Get them back into that tool. So you're continuing to make sure that no matter where you meet them along the journey, you're funneling them towards that job, that careers portal as well. And finally, be the change, to end it on this one. If you're wanting to get more mining engineers into the industry or more female tech students into the industry, work out how you can start to influence that. Maybe even get into high school. Maybe like Google, if you want to get more tech students into the industry, build your own tech courses, train them that way. There's no perfect answer here, but be the change. Think of how you can really be the influencer on influencing more of your target candidates into the market as well, because you'll really set the scene for the next generation of your leaders. That's it from me. Thanks for listening to me talk and ramble on for so long. I think we've got enough time to answer some questions, because I'm sure some people have got hopefully some questions, particularly hopefully for Jan and Steph. I've talked enough. So you might throw to the floor. Grant, I think you said you had a couple of questions come in earlier as well, potentially, in the lead up, if you're there.
I am. Thanks, Sam. Yeah, there was a pre-event question around, and it was interesting, you just touched on the high school space, and maybe it's one for Steph and Jan. What are you doing in the high school space to engage with students, if anything?
I've got something I could bring up. So Into Science is an organisation that Steph may know about in Victoria, who I've been engaging with. They essentially mentor students identified in lower socioeconomic regions in Victoria to mentor them in careers in STEM via using undergraduate students as the mentor. It's a really cool initiative, which I want very much Capgemini to be a part of. So last year, we just did a tiny bit to just sponsor a small element of something they were doing. But definitely see the opportunity and the need to do more in that space, especially because the stats aren't actually improving in terms of, for example, women in STEM graduating is actually lower than what was a while back. So I think getting into high school, we don't have to directly do it, or I think partnering companies like Into Science or associations like that is definitely on the horizon for us.
Another organisation particularly focused on STEM and women in STEM is Go Girl for IT. They're doing a lot within the high school space as well, and there's always a lot of opportunities for employers and other leaders within the women in IT space get involved. That was something that when I worked at Deloitte, we partnered with them to start to provide some educational sessions and develop the knowledge of what a career would look like within IT. I think it's something that you'll see rapidly grow is employers and universities' involvement at that high school level, because I think it is extremely important, and especially with the development of virtual experiences and virtual internships, it's opening it up for high school students to do it as well, because you're always on and the opportunity is always there.
Fantastic. Thanks, Steph. Is there any more that can come through grants at all?
No others, but we can open up to the floor if people want to stay on for a couple more minutes. Either turn yourself off. Oh.
Hello, hi. My name is Anne. I'm from Tata Consultancy Services. So I just had a question. In terms of engaging students once you've given them an offer and then there's a big lead time between the start date, what sort of engagement do you think works best during that time?
So we have a structured Keep in Touch program at Pitches, and it's kind of finding the balance between being in their face and then forgetting about them. So some of the simple strategies that we use is I provide a newsletter with them every fortnight, maybe every 3 weeks, just keeping them up to date with what's going on in the firm. We also look to get them involved in events as well. And another strategy that we have is because a lot of our hires come through our internship or vacation program, we have a respective buddy partner up with them, and it's also on that buddy to reach out with them and keep them up to date. We also try to get them involved in some of the team events as well. So if they are running some form of team event within that function, getting them involved to go along. Obviously that's hard at the moment given we are all working from home in Melbourne, but really just starting with a simple newsletter every month, every 2 weeks, just letting them know what's going on in the firm, makes them feel loved. A simple email saying good luck for your exams or Merry Christmas is enough. You don't necessarily want to bombard them 24/7 because they still are trying to finish uni and do their part-time work and so forth.
Something really cool that you could do, especially leading into exam times, I haven't done it, but I heard it in one of the events, is you could send an exam care kit to say, thinking of you, good luck, if you've got budget for it. Another thing I do, I've had to keep 2 warm for several months now, and I think it's good. I think we've got them still. That is just give them a call and just chat to them via email, definitely doing the LinkedIn thing with them and interacting. So liking their posts, interacting, commenting. I think it's just, I can't tell you enough, LinkedIn is a really good tool. Do you think I like LinkedIn maybe just a little bit too much? I just find it a really good way to be visible and then engage them as well, to get them warmed up to the topics they're interested in, coaching them. That's something I've done with one of our, something I do with our grads, but something I do as a keep warm strategy is to coach them on developing their profile and getting their thought leadership on socials. So that's a nice, easy and free way to do things as well.
Can always get them to call themselves out for joining the program as well on your LinkedIn. Make themselves, oh, I've just joined the Capgemini graduate program, for example.
That's 3.
Yeah.
I'm on it.
Yeah. Good.
Awesome. Thank you.
Any other questions at all? We're getting close to pretty much ready to wrap up, unless there's any last questions from anyone. Fantastic. Well, no, we might wrap up there then. Thanks to everyone for sticking around a couple of minutes late as well. Hopefully we all gained something for today. And again, as we mentioned, this has been recorded, and we'll also have a bit of those last 4 tips that I was running through near the end there about what you can do right from now to hopefully start building your engagement for next year and the years ahead. Remember, keep in mind, context is key with these students. Know what you're looking to provide the student, know what you want them to learn, and be targeted with your time as well, because we're all time poor, particularly team members who've only got one person or 1 or 2 people in their team. So be targeted with how you approach, and just give education back to the students, because that's where you'll build the best and the lasting connections. But thanks again to Steph and Jan for jumping on call and talking through what you've done, particularly because you're quite busy with all these events as well. I'm sure you've got lots on. Jan, I know you're in the middle of recruitment as well, so thanks for putting time out of your day as well. Thanks everyone again, and we'll see you at the next event.